In this age of gender confusion, it's difficult to find advice you can trust to help protect your child from those who would seek to unduly influence them, setting them up to be manipulated and exploited. On Unmasking the Trans Movement, we discuss, educate, and deliver the info parents want and need to help their children, grandchildren, and even themselves.
Welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement. Now, here's your host, Brad Wilder.
Good evening and welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. Tonight, Dr. Gillies is with us along with Jon and I to discuss, the 9 red flags. We're going to talk a little bit about children and sexual abuse. We're going to go through the 9 flags. Jon and Ann have a lot to cover tonight. There is so much to get to, and it's all coming up right here after this.
Citizens and librarians alike have expectations for libraries, and well-run ones can be amazing for everyone. School libraries are often essential to educating children, and as such, special rules apply for the well-being of children in every corner of the world. The World Library Association aims to counter the woke American Library Association's efforts to indoctrinate and sexualize children and hide content from parents and grandparents. The World Library Association provides decades of experience with libraries, and we want to help educate and apply that experience to improve your libraries, whether you're citizens, teachers, librarians, and even trustees. Our common sense model policies comply with community standards, enabling libraries to become truly useful for everyone in the community, and empowering librarians to ensure they work in a safe work environment. The World Library Association. Have questions? We're always open to talk about your libraries, new projects, creative opportunities, and how we can help you. The World Library Association. See us online at worldlibraryassociation.org.
Welcome back. Tonight, Jon is here, with Dr. Gillies. There's so much to talk about with the 9 red flags. Lots of images coming tonight. A pre-warning for everybody that's joining us live. Some of the images will be graphic in nature. We're going to have to show you this because if you don't see for your own eyes, it could change your perspective on the whole thing. It just snap of a finger, just one image, and you'll be going, what did I just see? And then you'll want to see more. And those images will then lead to, now I want to help. How do I stop this? How do I get involved? And that's the kind of thing I guess we really want around here is that participation. We're seeing it coast to coast. We've seen it from the Million Man March to everything else that's happened here in Canada. The States is on their own path. They're doing their own thing down there where they've got senators that are doing things in Congress and just all kinds of documents and legal paperwork, but we're not getting through up here in Canada the same way. So these 9 red flags, you need to take a look because this isn't just happening in the U.S., it's happening here in Canada as well, and these 9 red flags are disturbing, and that's why we need to talk about this tonight. Jon, great to have you on the program tonight. Looks like you're getting set up for a very interesting show.
Well, thanks, Brad, and I'm so glad to have Dr. Gillies with us. We love having our guests. We have subject matter experts we've had now for, I don't know how long we've been doing this, Brad, as far as on Unmasking the Trans Movement. But since we've been doing this live, we've had tremendous guests. But I figure it's time people get to know us a little bit. We are subject matter experts. And so especially dealing with the issue of troubled kids. And that's really who those that are pushing the grand ruse, the grand scheme of the trans movement are targeting. So, and there's nobody better in my estimation than you. And I'm so glad to have you alongside because not only are we therapists, but we are certified trauma therapists. You are certified complex trauma therapists. So we then look at the backgrounds, what's driving behavior, but also with troubled kids. The trans movement does not go after well-adjusted kids. So I'm so glad you're here because you are not only a professional, but you are an author. We're going to highlight one of your books tonight, Damaged by the Predators Among Us, as you and I look at what any therapist should look at when we have a kid that suddenly says, I don't want to be a boy, I don't want to be a girl, I want to be the opposite sex. So welcome.
It's good to be here. And Jon, I'm excited about tonight. I'm excited about what we're going to talk about, because these 9 red flags, and I want to say this off the start, right at the beginning, because these red flags are indicators of any kind of sexual abuse, and not just for children who are experiencing this idea of transgender in the wrong body. So keep that in mind, so people watching, can keep looking, say, okay, if I see a child exhibiting some of these things, then I need to see, what else is going on. But for sure, what we're going to talk about tonight is so interesting, because we need to be able to put the two together, how these red flags are evidenced in these children who are describing themselves as transgender. So yeah, you've got some great material to share, and we're gonna really have a good discussion. It's not an easy discussion. It's very difficult for parents, but it's very important.
That's right. And we will be taking questions. People have an opportunity now to ask some therapists who have years worth of working with troubled kids. So if you do have any questions, please submit those. We'll stop every so often to take those questions. Brad has complete permission to interrupt us at any point in time, because I have a hard time multitasking, to be honest, when I'm dealing with such a subject and such a good guest and co-host as Anne. And I thought it would be, and that was such a good caveat. We're not just focusing on kids that are in the trans movement. We're focusing on all kids, but predators will always look for wounded sheep. They'll always look for damaged kids. Sexual abuse does so much damage on so many levels. And the one thing it'll certainly do is it will override a child's intuition. So a perpetrator, predator, manipulator, cult leader, whoever has to, because they have no conscience, there's nothing to stop them from harming someone, from grooming someone. That's just manipulating. And so they will go after a kid's intuition. And basically that means they'll tell the child in different ways, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. So the child has no ability to reality test. That's all a financial perpetrator needs. If he wants access to your wallet, you'll start giving him money, and you'll never start to ask hard questions. And if somebody wants access to a child's body, they'll start doing the same thing. Yeah, the smarter they are, the less likely they are to be overt about it, because they don't want to go to prison.
That's right.
So it's going to be very subtle about it. Anne?
Well, that's right. And one of the things that I think we need to keep in mind when we're talking about child sexual abuse, so we can have the abuse happening in the home. Remember, I think this may be an older stat of the early 2000s, 2010, around that time, that 80% of child abuse happens in the biological family. And so there's an underlying, this idea that there's predators out there, but really the predators are often in the home themselves. Now, those children who are already, like you said, they're vulnerable. They have already been abused. They're in the school system. They're whatever. They're hearing all this other stuff now that's taught to them in the classroom, and they've got all this other confusion because of what's happening in home. So we have a lot of vulnerable children, and then we have the whole education that's making other children who are maybe normal in the home, then they have all kinds of other stuff going on and are even being introduced to some very sketchy sexual indoctrination. So yeah, so we need to understand what represents, what happens to the child, what do they start doing, what do they start saying, how do they behave that's different. What are the indicators? That's the important thing for parents to understand.
And unfortunately, those that are pushing this grand ruse and scheme have understood the power of ensuring that nobody asks questions. Thus, we as therapists, especially you all in Canada, same thing in California, Maine has kind of gone that way, that the last thing any perp wants is somebody, quote unquote, snooping around, asking questions, getting a kid to start disclosing. And
Yeah.
so one way they have ensured that is they have called this entire quote unquote protection of these kids. Anybody that attempts to do normal therapy will be labeled as doing conversion therapy.
That's
So we
right.
can't ask questions. And no child's just going to come right out with it saying, oh, I'm being perped on. There will be indicators, there will be signs. The child will verbalize things. So unless anyone, let alone a mandated reporter, that's what's so concerning about this, because a lot of predators will actually go into jobs or fields or professions that
Yes.
are mandated reporters that have frequent and regular access to kids. So they're not stupid. And so these predators are not stupid.
Hence the
So
flags
they're
on the schools, right?
100%, right?
Hence
So
the
they go
flags in the
where they have
schools.
access to kids. Therefore, they are mandated reporters. And we got lulled into thinking, those of us that are normal or protective of kids, and this is what happens at churches as well. Churches say, well, our church is safe because we have a training program, what to look for. It's really just the mandated reporting material. And we have them sign a commitment form that they have been trained and they promise to alert someone to sexual abuse. Well, like we think a perp is going to be ethical and therefore constrained by what they say or that they've signed on the dotted lines. And thus people are lulled into thinking, because we say, well, he doesn't have a criminal background. The vast majority of perps do not have criminal backgrounds. They haven't been busted yet.
They haven't been caught. And that's the reality. And yet they have already abused, who knows, dozens of children. I think the average, by the time they're caught, is about 70. You might know better than I do on that, John, but it's a lot of children being abused by each individual that preys on children. So it's a tremendous thing. In some ways, sexual abuse of children is nothing new. I was just reading actually some historical stuff, and let me read this. It was 1817 to 1899, there were over 500 published newspaper reports of father-daughter incest. This is in the 1800s. But that's before. So John, you see, I look at all this and I think this is evil. We've had evil in the world, but now that was happening in the 1800s. What's happening now? It's all on steroids because of everything else that children are exposed to through their cell phones and through their social media contacts, their friends.
No, through their schools with those flags that are still flown after July 31st or June 31st or June 30th, whatever it is. Look, it's past the end of Pride. Those flags are still flying at schools here in Manitoba right now. Out my back door, I'm watching this. And it disgusts me because these kids are all off on summer break. These teachers aren't at the school anymore to take your calls. Those flags are going to fly all summer long. That's the part that bothers me. So the acceptance is continuing, and they just keep pushing it and allowing it, and we're supposed to just sit back and accept it. I tell you, I'm prepared to go over and cut that thing down or set it on fire, and enough is enough.
Well, and because
of what the flag represents, we don't know that you did it. So,
but Brad, here's the deal: people don't understand what that flag represents. They just are so deluded by what they've been force-fed in social media and mainstream media for, basically since the 1970s. And so it's all about, we've got to be inclusive. We've got to love these people. We've got,
Well, let's move on to the pictures. Let's start showing what we need to show here tonight, because that's exactly the part that's going to hopefully set people in motion. That's the kind of communication that we need here. And you guys take it away. I'm going to step aside. You guys are doing a great job with this, and there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
There we go. Well, Brad, thank you. And so, Ann, we'll just continue. What we want to do is, in a way, grab people's attention, not in a gratuitous way, but for shock value. So we're going to show I'm going to show a couple of my posts initially, just to help people understand how important this is. This was a young lady who had her breast chopped off, double mastectomy, right? And what I indicated was, or posted on Twitter, unless you can list off for me the 9 key red flag clinical indicators of sexual grooming, abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and unless you can tell me how sexual predators use SOGI sex ed. That's what it's called in Canada. That's the sexual deviant sex ed with all the drawings in the books. And how they use the trans movement to groom the targets of opportunity. So again, unless you can show us the aspects, the indicators of sexual abuse, and how predators use these, then you're in no position to professionally, I can't read that, sorry, advise anyone on whether a young person suffers from gender confusion, since you're unable to meaningfully fulfill your basic responsibility as a mandated reporter. So the typical pushback and that you and I get are from people that are mandated reporters, but right now, if anybody goes up and asks them, so hopefully by the end of this program, people will be equipped with the 9 red flag key indicators of sexual trauma, and you can ask anybody that's pushing this, especially in school or anywhere, ask them to list off, and they should be able to quickly list off what these indicators are. Why? Because every mandated reporter is trained in child abuse awareness. Okay, so the very first thing I wanted to mention is, what is the trans movement, and why are we going to start on this? To help people understand there's been 20 years of brainwashing to help people think there's such a thing as trans. Okay, so what is the trans movement? It's the greatest man-made psychological scam and scheme ever perpetrated upon vulnerable young people. It makes vulnerable and confused young people easy prey for financial, medical, and sexual predators. It fast tracks them towards sterilization and amputation, leaving those with untreated serious mental health conditions and trauma, meaning the kids, and trauma-based disorders, most from past sexual abuse and exploitation, emotionally, psychologically, and physically scarred for life after they're dumped out onto a surgeon's gurney. It's a dangerous and diabolical lie. It's the result of a brilliantly conceived diabolical marketing campaign targeting those who are the most easily influenced and manipulated, meaning these kids. It has enriched big pharma, big porn, Planned Parenthood, and unethical doctors. It persuades mandated reporters to turn a blind eye to the 9 key indicators of sexual trauma. It's a sexual predator's favorite tool. Remove porn and its influence, and those using porn to groom the minds and boundaries of minors, and the entire trans movement would fade back away to where it was in 2005, which is non-existent. There are no such things as trans kids. There's only ordinary kids who've been manipulated and groomed into believing that they somehow were born in the wrong body, or because of dissociation from their bodies due to sexual trauma, so they don't feel comfortable in their own bodies. Medical, financial, and sexual predators are eagerly pushing this man-made psychological myth, as it enables them to gain access to the private parts of such young people for profit and prey. Most of these troubled minors have developed serious mental health issues because of the manipulation they've experienced, either by a parent with profound personality disorder or from being groomed by having their intuition dumbed down and their sexual boundaries blurred, manipulated, and violated. The notion of trans kids and non-binary is crafted out of thin air by those who intend to prey upon the vulnerabilities of young people. These terms are purely fabricated and manufactured by bright marketing profiteers who've used these terms to emotionally and psychologically manipulate such kids. It is a classic cult-like brainwashing. For adults to buy into this ruse, they merely facilitate a minor's delusional thinking, leaving the minor open to being further manipulated by medical, financial, or sexual predators. Anne, any thoughts? And then we'll go into some stats.
Well, that's a lot of information. I mean, that's a whole show right there. But you're absolutely right. Like that word transgender, I started using cross-sex confused children, because trans is simply a political tool. It's a political term. It's not a medical term. It's not a psychological term. It is just like you said. And it's just been so well, I would say we've been bombarded with it, but our children hear it every single day. And so for them now, this is a normal term. It's normative. And that these children are now considered normative, which is anything but. So yeah, this is great stuff, Jon.
So again, parents and all good people, please understand, prior to 2005, this term was never existed. Okay, so How can I say that? We're going to help by looking at just a few stats. There's so many stats that people can find themselves. So here are some under the topic or rubric today. What are the indicators of, again, the key indicators of sexual abuse? So the key behavioral indicators of sexual abuse: being dangerously blinded, willfully, purposely ignored by those pushing the trend. So we're going to set the stage here. So these are stats. Let me see if I can get this centered here. There we are. Okay, so these are stats from one of the US's largest transgender dispensaries, Fenway Health, out in that's a health system. Okay, look at the referral rate on the left. Now, don't take zero for granted. What does that mean?
Mhm.
Zero. Okay. When did they first even notice a blip? So from Fenway Health Services' own stats in their transgender treatment services, they never saw one patient prior to 2008. It didn't exist. If you were to pull back the curtain, or sorry, the lens, you'll see that it doesn't re-emerge earlier on. So it never existed. So the question is, where did it come from? Here are their own stats. You can see this is not a regular trend. This is a tidal wave. This is man-made.
A tsunami.
Kind of stats. Here's some additional stats. Okay, so we have out of which one is this? This may be out of the UK. One thing you'll find around the world, as far as Western world, you're going to see this exact trend at around 2013 or 2014. Okay, so what is the culprit of all this? The DSM-5. Without that, which comes down to what I call the dirty dozen plus one, so 13 individuals made all of this profitable, made all of this billable.
Let's clarify that for a minute. So these are psychologists and psychiatrists, and the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that all therapists use to. To me, it's all the labels.
I heard it. Heard it, folks, right here.
Yep.
Okay.
Mine's sitting up on another shelf.
Right.
Yeah. And there's some important things in there, absolutely. But this is what changed, and what you've got there, and it went from then being gender identity disorder, which is
this one.
Yep.
2014. Look at what happened when they manufactured. These 13 individuals decided to go looking for something, and Anne, you, me, any person in mental health, the question is this: how good was our treatment? Did we effectively treat people prior to the DSM-5?
Well, I think so.
We did fine work.
Yep.
Right?
There was, and I mean, this was such a rarity. This was such a rarity. 0.0014% of the adult population considered themselves transsexual. So, and that was the word, not transgender, transsexual adults. And so,
there are the referral rates. And again, this is in
that's Melbourne. So that's
again, wherever you look up these rates, it's not until 2013 and worldwide. This is not regionally, but worldwide. Mm-hmm. So what changed worldwide? Only the publishing of the DSM-5, which made it billable. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
No, that's good. It's good. Yeah. And look at the trajectory. I mean, and I think, I don't know if I showed the one from Tavistock last time or not, but they're all in the Western world. We see this whole upward swing that is incredible. So, that this is not something that is just it is out of thin air. It's a manufactured mental health crisis.
There you go. You look at RuPaul. As a matter of fact, Brad, let's go ahead and take, if there are any questions right now, we can certainly take some questions or comments.
Well, there definitely are, John. And we've got to say hello to, let's see here, Beatrix Kid Video, as well as Mr. Alex is online with us tonight. Big Island Beach is here as well. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us. And we're glad that you're here and participating. In terms of questions, some comments is to start it out, I guess. Some insane folks, hook, line, and sinker. So yeah, there are some definite mental struggles with some of these individuals that we see within the movement. I'm glad I caught the live today, says Beatrix Kid Video. Hi, John, Brad, and Ann. I watch all of your lives on replay, and I was pleased to see Karen Davis on.
That's right. They can go back and watch those. We have all those recorded.
Absolutely. So then, with regards to Mr. Alex, he says, John, Mr. Alex wants to know if you're aware about the DSM-5. When they came out, rapists, murderers, and serial killers got diagnosed with autism as well. Now, is this stigmatizing autism a little bit?
Well, they certainly, perps will use anything to their advantage. So it gave people additional leverage. And that's what we need to be careful, right, with any of the new volumes that come out. When it's dealing with a physical issue, that's one thing, a medical issue. But to medicalize things that aren't opens the doors for people to hide behind. So that's the concern.
All right. Well, that's kind of wrapping it up for this first little bit of questions at this point. But we'll let you get back to this wonderful information because there is just so much to get to.
Okay. Again, we're going to get to the 9 key red flag clinical indicators, but in order to do that, again, to really set the stage, help people understand the importance of what we're talking about. Historically, the red flags have been there, and they've always been interpreted the way they should have been. All training for mental health professionals, psychologists, therapists, whoever, is always interpreting them as indicators of sexual abuse. Now they've been reframed as indicators of trans kids, right? Born in the wrong body. So we want people to see how early this how this has just come on the scenes. And so it's but 20 years worth. Okay, so to show you it is man-made, and therefore how dangerous it is that now gender therapists or all these people that are pushing this, including mandated reporters who are teachers, are now sending kids off to gender clinics instead of really investigating as they should per law, quite frankly, because they're mandated. What are the other influences to help people see that this is very coordinated? We have RuPaul's Drag Race started about then. You can see the blip that just preceded the DSM. I have some other slides that show Jazz Jennings comes just after that. Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn Jenner came right in there as well. And then what is the result? Well, here's the numbers of mastectomies. Gee, there's no financial incentive, is there? So you can see what happened starting about 2016. That's big money, quite frankly.
So they glamorized all this for the kids, didn't they,
Let's
John?
remember that these mastectomies in Canada, even 13-year-old girls, these are children.
That's exactly where this one goes.
And children that they don't know what they're doing. And
they glamorized it all for them, didn't they?
They what?
They glamorized it all for these kids. They made it like, oh, look it's okay to be this way. It's okay to do this. It's okay to act that way.
Well, and there's a lot of complicating things that are going on. And what's happening is that children are actually, they're fearful of going through puberty now. Like, it's incredible because of the education program and because of social media and all these things. Well, you don't have to do that. You don't have to go through all that. You can just avoid it. You can escape it. And here's how you do it. You lop off your breasts. Like, come on, this is ridiculous. And they'll say, oh, no, you just have to do the social transitioning and, try it out. And then, oh yeah, you probably should try some puberty blockers, go on them. And of course the doctors are just, standing in line to give out these puberty blockers. Is so disgusting. I'm so upset with these medical professionals, as are you, John. And all of them are not doing the same thing. I'm not trying to paint everyone with the same brush, but let's face it, where are the doctors? There's very few.
It starts at the schools. Ththese teachers, these principals, these school boards, they're responsible for this. They're responsible for the push that's happening. You can't even blame it on a doctor because it's the kids who are being pushed by these teachers, principals, vice principals, social coordinators, all of it. all the way to the kids, and it's sickening. It's sickening, and it starts there, and it needs to stop. You need to get better people in charge of your school divisions.
Well, yes, and our school boards are just a joke. But yes, but there's a whole professional complacency and complicitness to it as well.
That's the money factor, right? That's where the dollars come into play.
And fear, the fear of speaking up and telling the truth.
There you go. And some of the additional slides I've been showing is to show how coordinated. Now, to what extent it's coordinated, I don't know. But, talk about a conspiracy. You look at all the different factors in play.
Yeah.
It seemed like the soil was being tilled. Now, here's another. So you can see there's RuPaul Drag Race. Transform Me apparently was, I know, what Orange is the New Black, that guy that was the cross-dresser. I forget his name, but anyways, so he was right in there, and then you can see Jazz Jennings. So a lot of influences. So we have the social contagion, then we have media. Here's an interesting overlap of stats, by the way. So that's when the DSM came in. I draw a straight line down over on the left, and you can see the rates of referrals. I think that's over in the UK. Now, again, if you go as far out as you want over in the left, you can see it never existed. And interestingly enough, in the US, look at the fentanyl deaths.
That's a really interesting comparison.
Very, right? What do we make of that? I don't know, but I tell you what, society, you got a whole lot of young people that are starting to look at the age of the typical person that dies of fentanyl overdose, typically under the age of 30. So you've got a lot of people. Who's going to try fentanyl? Well, probably somebody that's not feeling very good about themselves.
That's right. These kids are depressed. These kids are, and we talked about this last week, that these children their depression and the gender dysphoria are not alleviated with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. In fact, they're exacerbated by it. And so that happens, of course, then drugs. And here's the other piece of this. Within the LGBTQ activists and even the community itself, drugs are a huge issue. It's huge. Like, they're very encouraged. And so here you have these very vulnerable children, and you've got, they're encouraged to change their sex, so to speak, and then all of the other stuff, the partying,
participation,
the porn, yep, and the drugs. I think you're onto something there, Jon.
It'd be a good project for anybody to work on. If you want, you can send us what you come up with. Find charts like this and do anything pertaining to, that shows the ills of society. I bet we can look at the uptick in STDs, the uptick in abortions, the uptick, meaning things that are going to harm society. And, abortion is certainly an issue that's going to get people emotionally charged one way or the other. But we're looking at facts. We just need to look at facts to find out, is somebody, are powers that be behind the scenes, are they benefiting? And are kids and young people starting to be harmed by all this at an ever increasing rate?
So, Jon, we need to go, though. We want to get through some of these 9 indicators for people.
There we go. So we're just going on. We're setting the stage here. Again, we're looking at the face and the body of quote unquote top surgery. It is not top surgery, it's double mastectomy. I did want to mention there's a push out there. It says happy medium. I'm not in favor. It's called watchful waiting. We're just going to kind of take away, it's to slow the thing down. We need to stop the thing. So what I say here is the answer to kids who are being groomed by predators, financial and sexual, is not watchful waiting. That approach simply buys predators time to close in on their intended target of opportunity. They'll wait until the young person turns 18. Right? They'll wait. So the goal is to protect. Okay. The best approach is a direct approach, one that unmasks the predators and their deceptive movements. That's what we're all about. The transdeception is predatory, and no minor is safe in those waters. So, no, we are not watchfully waiting as predators close in. Aggressive, unmasking predators is what is needed to save kids.
Save the kids.
Okay. So we're going to look at there's no such thing as binary. This is simply cult spin for making you say there is no such thing as male or female. Cult leaders and predators know that if they can get you to deny the obvious, such as biology 101, they can then take you for all your worth and take your children, their sexual boundaries, their fertility, and their body parts. The trans movement is the greatest man-made psychological lie ever foisted upon vulnerable young people who have untreated mental health issues. The pushers of this diabolical scheme don't want you figuring out that it could not exist without the DSM-5, which was launched in 2013, which has permitted unethical professionals to get filthy rich off this scheme. As an experienced clinical therapist of 30 years and as well, so we've got about 60 years between us, having worked extensively with severely troubled youth, survivors of sexual trauma, and the full range myself with predators, I can assure you that this scam didn't exist prior to 2005. It's simply the ultimate Trojan horse to gain direct access to your kids, to target and groom them for profit and prey. We're now going to look at the indicators. So we're going to start with, I'll skip a couple here. We're going to look at 2 behavioral indicators. That's very important because long before you talk to the child, what might you see? You're going to see somebody that has distress being comfortable in their own body. And so I found a couple of little graphics there. I'm not a girl, so a girl is going to wear that shirt. Okay, wishing they could be the opposite sex. And this is really important. And we're trained in this, and any teacher, anybody should look for that sentence coming out of a kid's mouth, meaning that statement, I don't want to be a girl, I don't want to be a boy, meaning their own sex. I don't want to be a girl, I wish I could be a boy. And why is that an indicator of sexual abuse?
Well,
oftentimes, not 100%, but oftentimes.
Oftentimes is because the child has been sexually abused either in the home or by a relative or someone outside, even a predator, at the park or whatever, but usually someone they know, and they don't want to associate their sex with, they begin to associate their sex with sexual abuse. And so if they can be an opposite sex in their mind, because it is a mental state, that will keep them from being abused. It will keep them safe. That's kind of the logic, displaced logic. Sometimes it's that, sometimes it is because they don't want to identify with the parent of the same sex because they see mom as weak, or as not influential in the home, and there's stuff going on in the home. Perhaps there's domestic abuse. But nevertheless, there are adverse child affect happening in the home. And then you have these children that begin to talk about, I don't want to be a girl. I'm not a girl. We used to look at this kind of stuff and say, well, okay. And it's not that very many children actually came and said that outright. There were other things that were going on, but then it would come out in the conversation. And here now we accept this as the norm. Oh, you don't want to be a girl? You must be a boy then. Like, come on, give your head a shake. We need to take care of these kids and get to the root.
There we go. And that's why, again, the number one thing that the transdeception teaches these kids to say is, I don't want to be a girl, I want to be a boy. So you can see how many kids then are being overlooked that have actually been perked on. So the number one behavioral indicator, so to speak, is going to be a child that is uncomfortable with his or her sex.
And
we're
for
going
boys,
back to use the word sex, not gender.
Yes. And for boys, similar thing, and young boys, we forget that young boys get sexually abused regularly. And certainly we can talk about that later, but,
the boys will likely start dressing in girls' underwear.
Yep. They'll start doing some things, and the sexual abuse can happen so early in their lives, right? Especially in the home, if the perpetrators in the home, and so many are, then you have these children who are totally confused from the time before they're even able to walk sometimes. I mean, this is so prevalent in many homes, and it's so sad to say that. What we would think are normative homes, and then we find out, hey, there's sexual abuse going on. And we get all upset about what we see as sexual abuse, in the church, in the Catholic Church, and we focus on those. And I'm not trying to minimize that at all, but what we need to understand is that, by and large, most sexual abuse happens within the family or extended family, or within the school system, and with coaches and other people in authority. So we have this underlying thing. And so if the child has been violated, then you could hear these words. And I mean, that is exactly it. And yet now we normalize all of that as transgender.
So Dr.
Brad, we have-
Ann, Beatrix Kid Video says it used to be eating disorders were a huge indicator. Are they still? Young women would either try to starve away their breasts and buttocks, or they'd gain weight to try to be unattractive to men. Does that still happen?
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, and look at and what we see. What we
The number two, or already where
There
we're
you
headed.
go.
Yes. So
There
we've
are,
got
hey,
eating
our
disorders.
viewers are ahead of us. This is good, John.
That's
This
right.
is good. I'm glad to see that this is happening, because it means that people are more aware than they ever used to be.
Yep.
And the sad thing, and you see this in the LGBTQ, if you want to call it a community, how many are so overweight? I mean, just so many young women. Oh my goodness. And it's not just within the LGBTQ, of course, but so yes, either, the binge eating and purging, or which is bulimia or anorexia. So you have these behavioral things happening with children. When you see these things, they need to be addressed. These are clinical indicators of sexual abuse.
There you go. And one thing I want to mention, Anne, is that if somebody watching this encounters an adult, and the adult, instead of leaning in for more information, like, whoa, tell me more about this. Okay, John just said a boy dressing up in women's underwear. What? Okay, that's a normal, healthy adult, because unless somebody has a clinical background, but even still, right, you should want to know who is it that's saying that that's an indicator, and you would want to know, okay, John, what's your background and what makes you say that? Why? So we can keep kids safe. If any of the viewers or listeners encounter an adult who right out of the gate, right out of their mouth, when they hear, you know what, a boy is starting to put on little girl's underwear, could very well be an indicator of sexual abuse. If the very first thing is defensive, saying, oh, that Uhler, oh, that Gillies, whatever, they're homophobic, you need to be very concerned, especially if they have no clinical background. Why? Because we're getting close to the issues. And the last thing people want, the perps want, is for people to connect the dots. And that's what we're trying to do here. Moving kind of quickly, and we'll come back probably next week. And we're going to continue, because we're going to continue to look at some of these indicators, especially the indicators of predators. You wrote a book. We're going to show that book here momentarily. That it's very important. We've got to be able to see the red flags in kids and their behaviors, and the red flags in adults. So we looked at a kid not being comfortable in his or her body, and then showing advanced knowledge or awareness of sex and sexuality, really beyond what is age appropriate. And so this little graphic here, you're going to start to hear more and more this term, a mature minor. Who's going to say that about a mature minor? As well as, and they're going to do that because they want kids to be able to make their own medical decision. It will ultimately end in exactly what's going on in Canada, medical assisted suicide. And that is the ultimate way to silence the lambs if a kid's been perped on, quite frankly. So you have a child that, the most common thing I hear time and time again, and you'll hear this if you watch virtually all of the detransitioners videos, as they're chronicling the story of their life, they'll say something like this: By the time I was age 10, I figured out I was bisexual. Okay, think about age 10 versus when puberty hits. Some people say, well, puberty can hit us, but generally speaking, it's not until about age 12, give or take, but still, even at puberty, the question is, how does the child know about bisexuality? The answer is somebody has given that kid that information. The child's mind is already being groomed. Parents
Absolutely.
really need to know that.
It all goes back to Kinsey.
Okay,
You
there we
know,
go. And so right now, so if you also see a child that is hypersexualized, overly or highly sexualized, or if they start using the terms, now kids will use any term, but if they seem to know what those mean, so asexual, a child that's sexually abused will typically either go one extreme or the other, either hypersexual or wanting nothing to do with it. So if a child seems to be able to define what those mean, meaning a child prior to puberty or still early into middle school or even early into high school, the question is, what's up with that?
but
Guys,
John, the problem is now they're being taught these terms.
and that's true.
At
Grade
elementary school.
4 or 5 year olds. It's all part of WPATH's education, and to be implemented across the world. This isn't just in North America. This is the most treacherous kind of indoctrination and sexualization of our children.
There we go. And there's additional influences. We'll just speak on these very briefly, then we'll get to the indicators. Among other influences right now, you have dark influences, literally dark religious influences. You'll see the pentagrams show up more and more these days. The question is, what's that all about? Well, that's spirituality. And the one thing about what they call themselves, they're not Satanists. Satanist is a euphemistic term. So I call them the non-satanic satanic temple. So they don't believe in the person they apparently believe in, and they create statues that they want erected next to the Ten Commandments. Very interesting that they're creating statues of the one they don't believe in. Okay, moving along. But, right, the one thing about any kind of dark religion, so to speak, Satanism, satanic temple, is they have no boundaries in sexuality.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, somebody created a clothing line. Satan respects pronouns, and it was being sold in Target. Here's one of the shirts.
And how that draws children who are drawn into this movement and who even come out of our churches, perhaps, and now are so angry, so hostile, so bitter toward God, and yet so welcoming toward a Satan, and it's just a really, oh my goodness, these children just get drawn in.
So there are adults waiting for wounded kids. Another way these predatory adults look for kids is they'll start using anime and other and parents look for who is communicating with your kids. If you see any of these different things, be very mindful that you're more than likely, well, you're dealing with a predator. Here's some other ways the predators gain access. Again, they target kids in the trans movement. So you have guys dressing up in drag. If people are not familiar, and Brad, we are going to be talking about what are some of the ways pedophiles communicate with themselves and put out information about themselves. One is chicken, by the way. And so you see the guy over on the left, he turned out to be a sex offender. There's a shock. So he's talking to the news media right there, but look what he's holding on that was a drag queen story hour. Furries is another way. Furry is a big mascot-like costume that hides 100% of the identity. I first learned about that from a heinous pedophile in Pennsylvania Department of Corrections while I was on psych staff doing sex offender treatment. And those that are into furries are also into plushies. That little stuffed animal has a hole for a man to pleasure himself. These are very deviant individuals that look for wounded kids, and they will always fail on social media to answer a quick screening method, which is with these kind of men. We see the pride guy on the left. That was a pride event. That middle guy, these are all naked with kids. That was Queen Lactatia, one of the RuPaul drag race things. And then look at the guy over here. I think that was over in Europe. And he hands this child a brush, and the child is anally brushing him or brushing his anus, and all these parents are watching. So the question is this simple question you can ask people online that seem to be defending this. Just simply ask this: Are these sexually deviant? Are these sexually deviant men? Have they filled their minds with porn? Are they sexually deviant? And are these men predatorily grooming these kids? And should they be arrested and charged criminally? And you will find that 100% of the predators will sidestep it, especially when you ask them, will you then identify yourself on social media and come on to Unmasking the Trans Movement with Ann and Jon and proudly condemn and say any man that does this should be arrested, and they won't. They'll change the subject. That's a quick screening.
It's a triple X carnival freak show.
There you go. Right.
Well,
so
here's my problem with this. I mean, other than the very obvious, and I mean, this is horrific, graphic. I'm sorry, folks, that you're going to be exposed.
We need to know
this,
it.
But parents. So we have a generation of parents who have been so indoctrinated, and so their minds have been, they're open to all kinds of sexualities, which is exactly what our social media and our education system is expanding on. And now they're bringing their little children to experience these things. And so if the parents are already open to all of that, what's going on in the home? What's going on in the home?
Here we go.
And it just breaks my heart, because these children are innocent children being exposed to horrific things.
Pride parades have gotten more extreme as the years have gone on. We've been doing this for a few years now, almost 3 years. And I tell you what, every single Pride year, every single June, it seems to get more and more extreme, whether it's in Los Angeles, that seems to be the home of all this, or San Francisco, which is the real home of it all, and where it all, I'd have to say, started. And then it's bled to every single major center and city across North America. It's bled into the mid-level towns as well, and then the small towns are seeing it. And for what? What's the percentage of individuals who are part of this movement? What's the percentage? Is it 0.4?
It's interesting because we have stats saying that the Gen Z is like 30%, are identifying as non-heterosexual. But the reality is, and I think we talked about this before, that they're identifying because it's a thing to do, not because their behavior is following that route. Actually, the percentages of actual lesbians and homosexuals is still, basically under 5% of the population. But then you get, this push, the transgender, and of course, there's not a lot of love lost in the community between the transgender and the gay and lesbian.
And there's a lot of closeting going on as well. They come out for that month. They come out to Pride, but otherwise they hide in their closet and they go out on the weekends. But the kids at school are being obviously pushed by the teachers, the principals, the school division, school boards.
Well, and I mean, there are individuals, and I think we don't want to paint everyone with the same brush, but let's face it, that there's a problem with this movement, the whole movement, and that it is so highly sexualized. And I just think of some of the pictures I saw of the Toronto Pride Parade this year. I mean, naked men. I mean, we've seen that before, but there was just a group of naked men just parading down the street, butt naked. And I just think, in what life do we need this?
There was videos of men performing fellatio on another man in the middle of the street in Los Angeles.
There we go. And that's why we've kind of, now we'll get to the indicators, right? But to really set the stage for, if a child goes into this movement, and I just saw a comment, but Brad, if you want to mention if there's any comments, but the question is, what about the church? Well, go to churchprotect.org and you'll see it's equal opportunity, where the most sophisticated of predators will target churches above all else. But the question is this: are you concerned? Are you concerned wherever children are vulnerable to this and there's predatory adults? So churches and the trans movement are the number one havens for predators. So we need to be able to identify the red flags of perps. We're going to be doing that next week for the next few weeks for people. But now, again, what are the red flags of a child that's being perped on? Brad, are there any questions? And now we'll go through it. We just set the stage for all that.
Not really. I mean, there's more just comments in a sense. Churches bringing it into small towns and preschools, and allowing it.
Oh yeah, the drag queen story hour and all that. It's very dangerous, and I want to recommend an excellent book by somebody we know. It's Dr. Ann Gillies' book, Damaged by the Predators, and this was your own personal story. I have a couple of my little charts in there, but it's such an important. Here's my copy. I urge everybody to get a copy because Ann's going to show you how these predators will look for any opportunity, including marrying people with kids. And it's really horrific. So we have to know the red flags of child abuse.
Before we go on to that, can you go back to the last slide? I want to make a comment on that slide. So Andrea Longchu, she, one of the things,
biological male, right?
Biological male, what he said is that he never felt suicidal until after he began transitioning.
There we go.
After he began, and that is so often the story.
And you see, played a role, and he was probably perked on once he got in there. Yep.
And that's all together. Anyways, yeah, so sorry to do that, but I just thought people need to understand, because I hear so often that if they don't let these kids transition, they'll kill themselves. Well, the suicidal stuff and the effect of all of the mental health just bombarding them comes often down the road into the process.
Okay, so let's look at, we just looked at one of the behavioral indicators, which is also the clinical indicators. So what are you going to start to find? We'll go through this and we'll probably pick up next week so we can do justice to each of these. So parents or concerned people, adults, here, including if there's any young people watching, here's what to be mindful of. The number one thing is self-injurious behavior. These are serious things, not the superficial stuff. Okay, if it makes you uncomfortable, understand, but you need to understand this is happening. The young girl up here, does she have short sleeves or long sleeves on? She has long sleeves. So one thing to watch for or look for, be mindful of, teachers, you need to be aware of this, is a child that seems to be dressed always almost for weather that's cooler. Right, so long sleeve, you can imagine why. And these are, you can see, these are not superficial things. There's a lot of scarring, some of which might even require sutures or stitches. And so what do we find oftentimes in those? And these scars preexisted her having her breast chopped off by Dr. Evil Nazi like Gallagher in Miami. And the question I ask people is, this girl left or right-handed? And why would you make that, or why would you draw that conclusion? Okay, these are not minor things. And these scars on her stomach are came from the same thing. These are her fingernails as well as razor blades. Actually, these are blades. You can see how straight they are.
That's right.
Okay, so, and by the way, this is the serious kind of suicide attempt. When it goes across the wrist, it is all of them are serious. That one looks like it goes across, but that'll be much more lethal, potentially lethal. Okay, so look at what this doctor ignored. When she did her exam, she had to have looked at this child, this young adult. And again, that's why it's not watchful waiting that we're after, because any predator will say, well, like Dr. Gallagher, she's still, the moment this young lady would turn 18 these days, then Dr. Gallagher will still do the thing. It's unfortunate, but you know, we need to push for legislation to age 25. Okay, so the first thing you look for, do you see any self-injurious behavior? Here's going to be number 2. We looked at that. Anorexia, that is self-starvation. You see that this picture over here, these two right here. So if you see someone dropping weight, Karen Carpenter of many years ago died of that. It's very lethal. Bulimia is the binging and purging. So laxatives are used, or so they stuff themselves and then they will throw up. So there's a picture of a bunch of different foods. And then emotional eating. Bulimia, eating disorder, by the way, they'll eat in secret.
That's right.
Okay? And then you see the different, I like that screenshot, purging, binging, and there can be a lot of fluctuation. And They can come out of certain family dynamics. Okay, number 3, depression. What does that look like in teens? Lasting feelings of sadness, withdrawn agitation. This is very unique to young people. They don't know how to do depression like adults. So you'll see agitation, problems concentrating, changes in sleeping and eating, shifts in mood, loss of interest in activities, isolation, school problems, significant change in peer group, substance use, and preoccupation with dark things or death. And any
Well,
thoughts?
that's very interesting when you look at that and see with where the trans movement is and colluding with the, I will call it satanic effects of that, and you did a great job on this, all of those indicators, loss of interest in activities, because these children end up then gravitating toward one particular group and to the demise of other friends. They push away their other friends, and they end up being in a group that feeds into all of the stuff that they're already dealing with. And so they don't have outside influences. They're isolating themselves, and they're not getting the outside influences that could actually help change their brain and start them thinking about other things more critically, and be able to go, well, I don't think that's really right, or that doesn't make sense to me. They're not thinking on those levels anymore.
Fine. Maybe we'll go. Brad, are we okay if we go a little bit longer than an hour?
Oh, of
Okay, there
course,
we go.
100%.
So again, we've got self-injurious behavior, we have eating disorders, we have depression. Here's another one. And again, look how, in order to send a kid off to a gender clinic, you got to reframe all this. You have to, as a mandated reporter, these are all indicators of sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
But those that are pushing this trans movement are going to see these indicators and turn a blind eye to it. The next one, number 4, and this not necessarily impending doom. And panic attacks, if left unattended, eventually will grow into agoraphobia. The word means fear of open spaces. It means they start to isolate. Eventually, they will isolate into their bedroom and won't come out. And your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Oh, well, our young people. Well, so here, thinking about that and just thinking about some young teens or even older teens who are actually isolating themselves in their rooms with video games and have little to no human contact, and throughout the week. Like, they aren't, they're finished school perhaps, and they're without a job, so many young men without jobs, and so they're sitting in front of computers and usually looking at porn, but they're isolating and doing things, and this global feeling of impending doom, and the lack of
You're a
John,
visitor.
John, start again on that. Okay, I
That's
think we're
okay.
back again. So we
there you
lost
go.
we lost for a minute there, John, or so. Again, go back and start that again. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's right. Everybody will have to bear with us. Well, so
Yeah.
maybe there's more to it than meets the eye right now that somebody doesn't, at a dark level, doesn't want us to talk about it. So there's plenty of stories of kids that end up going into the psych unit. Their parents will take them there. Why? That one day they suddenly freak out. They can even grab items. They see self-injurious behavior going on in their kid. So parents care about their kids. They see these behaviors. They don't know what in the heck has been going on. It's been preceded by depression, anxiety, but all of a sudden now this child is showing the physiological signs. They can't breathe. They're dizzy. Maybe now the parent sees the self-cutting, the injurious behavior, and off to the psych hospital they go. Well, once they check their child into the psych hospital, the psych hospital now takes temporary custody of your child. You are now a visitor. I've heard many stories now where parents go to visit their child and the child suddenly says, "Oh, I've adopted a different pronoun." Now, the question is this: why are they even talking about pronouns in a psych hospital with a child that's showing all evidence of self injurious behaviors and being very suicidal? Why did you introduce that idea that came from an adult staff or somebody that is rooming with the kid? And so what this does is, at the very least, it serves as a grand distraction, and it adds a very dangerous placebo effect, because now suddenly the kid has something else to distract themselves, and somebody's going to come along, affirm them, and say, "You know what? I think we found the issue. I think you're born in the wrong body." And now this kid suddenly has a poof experience.
yeah.
So these parents are inheriting this child because somebody unduly influenced their child within the field of mental health in psych hospitals.
But
It's
it's
very
not just
dangerous.
the hospitals. If they take your child to a psychologist or psychiatrist now in Canada, they will be affirmed and they will be told, and so if they're having all of these kind of things going on, if they're having panic attacks and they're having some of the other indicators, it's very likely that a professional would even go down that route instead of going down the trauma route and actually looking at what has happened to the child. Instead, they're taking this other route and saying, well, maybe you were born in the wrong body. That's the problem. And of course, you're like you said, a child will grab onto that and think, oh, that'll fix me. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And what a mess we've made with these
They are.
children.
And you just nailed it right. So if a kid's been perped on, so instead of focusing on, I'm wondering what the root of the suicidality is, now suddenly a perpetrator or an agenda-driven individual is not going to begin to do what they should do, the self-exploratory thing. Suddenly they're going to come up with a secondary option. And so the pain now is never addressed, the root of it. Why did this child show all these indicators? Here's another indicator. We're up to number 6, bipolar disorder. Okay, you can see I just did a screenshot. People can go on, I recommend people go on, look up the diagnoses, as it were, the symptoms of all of these, so you can take time looking at these. Because again, in and of themselves, one of these, do they naturally indicate sexual abuse? No. But could that have happened? If the more of these you see, it increases the likelihood that the underlying issue, the underlying psychic pain, the origin of it is sexual abuse. Okay, so the
Well,
rapid or sudden, yeah, and
and for these children who are cross-sex identifying, they have multiple different indicators. So what you're seeing is you may see 3 or 4 mental health issues, very serious mental health issues with these children prior to them being diagnosed, if we want to call it that, as trans. And so instead of treating all of these things, which we should be treating, we might have to come back another time and
you know,
finish.
I think you're right. And my apologies to people. They said, John, you put 9, you haven't covered 9. Well, you know what? We wanted to help you see that again, the importance of being able to properly diagnose a child, meaning get it right. And if what is happening, and it is happening, that those that are pushing the trans deception are taking each of these indicators. So we'll kind of leave people here on a cliffhanger. Okay. Trust me,
That's right.
there's more to come. So we'll get out of this now. So people then can become wise stewards of these kids. So we can begin to be mindful that we don't want to put a band-aid approach or offer a quick solution to deeper issues. And so I didn't intend to, you know, that's probably typical for me. I try to pack more into it than, but again, we're so concerned that these kids that are troubled, that go into the trans movement, are easy prey for the predators that have embedded themselves. And so now they go in there and they will be perped on. And
Yes,
now
yes.
the symptoms will increase. So the last thing one of these children need is to be manipulated into and be exploited into further harm by medicalizing them or leaving them easy prey for other predators that are going to begin to even have further way with these kids. Anne, any thoughts about that? And then we'll come
Well,
back. So there'll be part 2 next week.
it'll be part 2 next week, but just to say this, that here is a child who has, in all likelihood, been exposed to pornography or perhaps even sexually abused. And then the cycle just continues for these children. And it gets deeper. It's like they get deeper and deeper and deeper into this well of sexualization. And then, you know, anything that would be normative behavior is not even understood, you know, and we don't even teach, you know, love and marriage in schools now. We don't do that. We talk about sex. You know, we don't talk about commitment. We don't talk about covenant. We don't talk about abstinence. We talk about all of these other things. And so children are already so sexualized and their mental health is so precarious to start with. And then, of course, the trans. Anyways, there we go again. We're off on another shoot.
There you go. But
We better stop for tonight.
think about how many of these gender therapists also are into suggesting that kink or BDSM is a way to help heal these kids. So you
Well,
can see
and
how diabolical that is.
oh, and you know, those are kind of the tip of the icebergs because then you have pups and bestiality and everything is included. And it's just a sick place if we don't protect our children.
Brad, we'll do part 2 next week. How's
An
that?
abused brain needs mental help, right? That's the bottom line. And there's a lot of people out there who need the assistance and need the help. Again, the medical industry here in Canada doesn't allow us to talk about that help that should be first and foremost. But nonetheless, we bring you the show. It's an American show, and we bring the American point of view as well to this whole thing with Jon based out of South Carolina. And I think that opens the doors for us to be able to communicate a message that you can portray, Jon, that we can't say up here. And we appreciate you very, very much for being able to be that voice for us and say the things that both Anne and I can't say. Well, I'll say Anne can't say. I still challenge him to come on over.
I think we do anyways. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for being here tonight. There's more to cover, as Jon has mentioned. He's left you on a great cliffhanger. There's more to come next Sunday night, 9 o'clock. Thank you to everybody who's been online, from Beatrix Kid Video to Oh My God, Not That Nonsense, there's been many other individuals online with us tonight. So thank you very much to all of you for being here. Mr. Alex, Big Island Beach. Yeah, so we couldn't do it without you guys. We really do appreciate you being here, and we hope you're learning a lot as we go. So next Sunday night, 9 o'clock, we'll do it again. Who's our guest next week, John?
Well, it's going to be us.
It's going to be us back again?
You get stuck with us again.
Did we cover why Alex isn't here tonight?
I think there was some conflict.
There was a conflict? Yeah, that's right. But
schedule.
We'll get back to her sometime in the future, I assume.
Absolutely, we will.
That'll be the third or fourth time, but we're going to get there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Oh, that's right. Erin. Yep. Erin, she will come back. She's a wealth of knowledge as far as human trafficking. So she had to put things on hold for a little bit. So I figured that gives Ann and I a chance to help people see our own fund of knowledge there, FUND, meaning we do know a fair bit, and we want to help dispense that to parents, free of charge, by the way.
Well, thank you very much to everybody again for being here. Thank you, John and Ann. We'll see you guys next week. On behalf of John and Ann, this is Unmasking the Trans Movement. Till next time, remember, it's not our kids' fight, it's our fight. So it's time to step up and take action. We'll see you next week.